Good morning, brethren. I'm wondering if any of you have ever been asked whether you're a native of Cedar. I'm going to tell you what a native of Cedar is. A native of Cedar is someone who was born here, whose father was born here, whose grandfather was born here, whose great-great-grandfather was born here, whose great-grandfather was born here, and whose great-great-grandfather was one of the original pioneers that Brigham Young sent to settle the area in the mid-1850s. I am a native of Cedar. But sadly, I broke the chain. None of my children were born in Cedar. Great-great-grandfather Haight was the original stake president here in what was then the Parowan stake. And great-great-grandfather Higbee was one of his counselors. A generation later, great-grandpa Higbee was also in the stake, a counselor in the stake presidency. Great-great-grandfather Haight was also the first mayor of Cedar City. And my own grandpa was a mayor of Cedar in the mid-50s. My mother was a Levitt from Santa Clara. And her heritage and history is memorialized in the display outside the Santa Clara city office buildings right there on Main Street. Maybe some of you are familiar with that. But there's a life-size statue of my great-great-grandmother surrounded by life-size busts of each of her children, including my great-grandfather. And plaques in the area record the Levitt Trek West and family history. So in our family, the bar has been set very high, and personally, I've felt a responsibility to try to live up to that heritage. My father and mother were Clyde and LaRue Higbee. In the home, we celebrated family a lot since virtually all of southern Utah was family at that time. But family was always very important, and particularly in my mother's final years, she would constantly remind us that family is what it's all about. It's the family that's important. Beyond that, our parents emphasized the importance of education in our home and the importance of striving to fulfill our individual potentials. And the emphasis they placed in those areas I've always been grateful for. I am a product of the Cedar City school system, from kindergarten through high school. I even attended Southern Utah University upon graduation from high school. I then left on my mission. Upon returning home, I transferred to BYU, where I met Carolyn. We were married after our sophomore years, and our first child was born the summer we graduated. And it was later that summer that we loaded all of our earthly possessions and our little girl into our Mustang and left for Chicago. I had been accepted at the University of Chicago Law School, and that's where we were headed. I'd like to add a footnote here that you may find of interest. At that time, the law school would assign each incoming student a faculty advisor to assist and consult with. I was assigned a young law professor by the name of Dallin Oaks. And the Oaks family turned out to be such a blessing and an asset to us over the next 3 years. We look back with fond memories even now to all they did for us and how important they were to us during those difficult 3 years. Upon graduation, I chose to seek my fortunes in the corporate world rather than in private practice. As it turned out, the company that I went with was rapidly growing and eventually became one of the Fortune 500 companies, and more importantly to me, the darling of Wall Street in the decade of the 90s. My practice was a transactional practice in that I was involved with mergers and acquisitions and corporate finance. We were responsible to raise all the capital necessary for ordinary operating expenses, and like all major corporations, we were constantly rolling over our debt, necessitating refinancing. The nature of that work meant that I spent an awful lot of time over the years on Wall Street. While I never moved my family there, the company maintained a full-time apartment there, and so that enabled me to expose all my family to city life. I suppose I could say an unintended consequence of that is that 3 of my children ended up having successful careers in the city themselves. But more important to me was the fact that the company's success allowed me to move on to the next stage of my life. We always felt that the Lord had blessed us with the time and means to serve. And we felt a very strong responsibility to do so. Having lived in the mission field the majority of our adult lives, we had experienced firsthand the contribution that senior couples make. And we had directed our thoughts along those lines. We took 2 years to wind things up in Tulsa, move to Cedar, get our home built, and get somewhat settled. Then we submitted our papers. We were called to the New York Rochester mission. One thing that was unique about this experience that was different than subsequent missions is that I was called as a counselor to the mission president with responsibility for the western part of the mission. Consequently, we spent all of our time in and around Buffalo. We returned home, took a couple of years to get reacquainted with our family, meet those grandkids that had been born in the meantime, and left this time for Louisiana, Baton Rouge. Here we were called to serve in a little branch out in the middle of the swamp about an hour west of Baton Rouge. We repeated the pattern. We returned home for a couple of years, got reacquainted with the kids, met the grandkids that had been born in the meantime, and left again. This time we were called to the New York North Mission, which at that time included New York City, Westchester and Putnam counties to the north, if you're familiar with that area, and a small portion of southern Connecticut. All of our missions were just wonderful, and I need to backtrack and talk a little bit about my first mission. I'm sure all of you remember Elder Ballard's talk from a couple of conferences ago, where he described his mission and the impact and influence it was on his life. His sentiments express my experience precisely. My mission literally changed my life. I was a naive little southern Utah boy that had never been east of Highway 89. And the experience, as I say, literally changed my life. It is there that the spiritual foundation was built, upon which I rely on yet today, and will always cherish that experience. Our senior missionary experiences were equally life-changing, although in different ways. Although the work we did was basically the same, each mission was very different because the people we dealt with were very different. But eternal friendships were made, lifetime friendships were found, special experiences that can't be duplicated. We still are in contact with people we met and worked with and taught over 20 years ago. Perhaps the best thing I can say about senior missionary service for those of you that are considering it is that I found more personal satisfaction in my missionary service than I ever experienced in my professional life. Now, if we can move on to in the last 12 or 13 years since we returned from our last mission, I've been preoccupied with something President McKay said many years ago. And if I can paraphrase, it was something to the effect, I urge priesthood leaders everywhere, before they enter eternity, to leave their testimonies for their children, their grandchildren, and their posterity. In the intervening years, I've pondered extensively what that should mean to me. What I'd like to do is share with you how I've chosen to respond to President McKay's urging. Thank you. I put together a book entitled David and Carolyn Higbee Family Missionary Journal. All 6 of our children served missions. I served a mission as a youth, and we served 3 missions together. Each of the children contributed a chapter on their own missions in this book, and then, of course, we have information on all of our missions. I also included listings of all the missions served by members of our direct line, beginning in 1832, I believe, was the first mission served by one of our ancestors. One of my thoughts was that it might be interesting for our posterity who served missions to know where predecessors had served, and on the chance that they might be going the same place, and have that by way of background. And interestingly, there's already been a couple of overlaps. On our 3rd mission, we served in the same area where my great-great-grandfather had served over 150 years ago. And more recently, we had a grandson return from Uruguay a little over a year ago who met people in 2 different locations who remembered our daughter who had served in the Uruguay Brazilian mission over 30 years ago. So that's been a fun thing. To just give you a flavor of what I was trying to accomplish, let me just read a paragraph from the introduction. King Benjamin posed the question, how knoweth a man the master whom he has not served, and who is a stranger unto him, and is far from his thoughts and the intents of his heart? If we had the ability to speak to future generations of our family, we would bear testimony that full-time missionary service is the surest form of service available to young men and young women who want to come to know the Master. It is our prayer that our posterity may use this record to increase their faith in the restored gospel and in missionary work, and that faith will lead them to a resolve to serve a mission. And then I put together another book, the big book.
What's the front?
I chose to call this In the Language of the Scriptures. And this is 650 pages of notes I took over 35 or 40 years of studying the Scriptures, sprinkled with a few personal thoughts and some of my own spiritual experiences over those years. It treats about 25 or 30 different gospel topics, but what I wanted to do is teach these principles using the Scriptures, hence the language of the Scriptures. And again, let me just share a paragraph from the introduction to again give you a sense of where I was going. Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints are under covenant to stand as a witness to God at all times and in all places. I would like this work to stand as my witness to you, my posterity, of the truthfulness of the restored gospel and God's plan of happiness. To paraphrase Jacob, I've written these things that my posterity may have a small degree of knowledge concerning me, that they may learn with joy and not with sorrow, neither with contempt, concerning my beliefs. For this intent has this material been compiled, that you, my posterity, may know that I knew of Christ and had an understanding of his central role in God's eternal plan. I know as Nephi, there is no other way. I have received a personal witness of the Spirit that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the only church with the fullness of his gospel. It is the only church with sealing power to make valid in heaven the ordinances of the priesthood performed on earth. It is my prayer and greatest desire that each of you will be willing to pay the price, to make the effort required to come to know these truths for yourself, that you may experience as I the peace and joy this knowledge brings. And if some of you wonder what retirees do, we write another book. This book is entitled Your Legacy of Faith, and it's addressed to my grandchildren. And I've already referred to my heritage and the special heritage it is. This exercise turned out to be a real labor of love and a special spiritual experience. I literally felt promptings from the other side to the fact that these stories need to be told and they needed to be preserved. So what I did is took my grandparents and went back 3 generations on all 4 lines, back to the generation that initially joined the church back in the early 1830s. And I say it's dedicated to my grandchildren, but what I really had in mind is my posterity that I will never know. And again, to just give you a flavor of what I was trying to accomplish, let me just share a couple of excerpts from this book. The Lord has made it clear that remembering your religious endowment of faith and sacrifice will be of great worth to you. The histories in this volume will give you a special personal resonance because they are the stories of your ancestors. In the words of Alma the Younger, you have all these things as a testimony that these things, the gospel of Jesus Christ, are true. In these histories, you will find both humor and pathos. You will both laugh and cry. But most importantly, you will find powerful witnesses of the life and mission of Jesus Christ and the truthfulness of the restored gospel. For this reason alone, their stories need to be told and retold. And then from the third section, that you might know the promises of the Lord and that you might believe the gospel. These histories and the story they tell must be what the prophet Joel had in mind when he counseled, "Tell your children of it, and let their children tell their children, and their children another generation." As you reflect on these histories of 4 generations of your family, beginning with those who initially joined the church in the early 1800s, you will come to understand and appreciate the price that has been paid for your inheritance. At a minimum, it would seem your debt of gratitude would compel you to make the effort to honestly study and prayerfully consider the faith of your fathers. As you make this a priority, you will learn, as they learned, that God rewards effort, and you will come to know these truths for yourself. The sacrifices they were willing to make for their faith is the monument left to guide their posterity. Perhaps the vision is best captured in the words of Grandma Fanny Spilsbury. We hope we have planted well that our children's children might have the faith that was our choicest possession. Through the echoes of time, their plea to you would be, attend to our words, incline thy ear unto our sayings, for they are life unto those that find them. And you might recognize that from Proverbs. As was said of Grandpa Phineas Richards at his funeral, he bequeathed his faith and his testimony as the most precious legacy he could offer to his children and his posterity. Hope I can get through this. Over the years, I have come to learn, as Grandpa Richards, that my choicest possession is my faith and testimony of the gospel. And the most precious legacy I can leave my children and grandchildren and posterity is that legacy of faith. And I want to thank you for indulging me to hear my testimony and those things that are special to me. And thanks for your time. As it may.
They will be very, very moved by their grandfather's testimony.
Well, I've just always felt impressed that, there's going to be something in there that's going to touch a member of the future generation that's going to make a difference in their life. And all it will take is one such experience to make it all worthwhile.
These books are a big part of your legacy. I can't believe the amount of time that has gone.
How have you struggled and grown in your faith and faithfulness?
Like everybody else, I suppose, I've experienced ebbs and flows as I've journeyed through life. My anchor has always been what I taught people in New England over 60 years ago, and that is you've got to say your prayers, attend your meetings, and study the scriptures. And I found that whenever I feel like I'm getting complacent or maybe a little off track, if I focus on those three things, everything comes back to refocus, and I'm on the path again. In many ways, when I look around, compared to all the people we met and worked with in the mission field, we've lived a pretty charmed life, and I've often thought that maybe the reason that's the case is because the Lord's not confident I can handle the sort of things so many people go through. I don't know, but I've really never strayed far from what I know to be true.
What gospel truths are you most certain of?
You know, on my mission, I bought into the whole enchilada. You know, maybe I should give a little more background on my mission. I served in what was then the New England States Mission, which included the 6 New England states and the maritime provinces of Canada. Truman Manson was my mission president, and I was blessed to spend the last 6 months of my mission in the mission home learning at his feet. He'd written several books on Joseph Smith. Sharon, Vermont was in our mission. I was always blessed with the firm testimony of Joseph Smith. Never a doubt in my mind. I just had too many experiences, not only there, but in Palmyra and the surrounding areas, which was where our first senior mission was. And with President Manson's background and testimony and teaching, it's never been an issue for me, which apparently it has been for a lot of other people. But the gospel it's so logical and so natural. That's one thing. Again, going back to my first mission, it didn't seem there was a question anybody asked that the gospel didn't have an answer for. And what was the question again?
Gospel truths you're most certain of.
Yeah. So again, I've never had an issue with anything. If we just follow the prophet and study the scriptures, there's no reason to ever stray.
How do you think about your purpose on earth?
Well, I think I've already addressed that. I think that the Lord has made very clear our purpose here on earth. We're to become more like Him. And an essential part of that is becoming a husband and a father. As a matter of fact, I don't know of any other way to develop many godlike qualities other than through our experience and training as husbands and fathers. I firmly believe that the commandment to multiply and replenish the earth is in full force and effect. As a matter of fact, he's made it perfectly clear that his whole plan depends upon that. So that's been one of my favorites.
All right, so we're to the lightning round. So tell us your favorite food.
Hey, listen, I was raised by parents who grew up in the Depression. I learned to eat everything and to appreciate everything that was put on the table. And I still eat everything.
Favorite place?
You know, my favorite place is where my family is. We've lived many places across the country. My kids are spread all over the country, and my favorite place is when I'm with them, wherever that might be.
Hobby or interest?
Sports is my hobby. I'm one of those who was a jack of all trades and master of none. But I've always enjoyed sports, both participating and following my kids and my grandkids. Certainly one of the highlights of my sporting life, and it's apropos this time of year since the Little League World Series is currently going on, but in 1988, one of my boys' team from Tulsa made it to the Little League World Series, and that was a great experience. But I'm kind of glad to get tonight out of the way because we're having our family fantasy draft on Saturday, and I need to prepare. So,
influential book or books?
You know, the Book of Mormon's my book. You know, my wife's never been able to understand why I don't read the books she brings home, but you know, you only have limited time to read, and I prefer to spend my time in the standard works. I always try to keep the Book of Mormon open, and it's such a confirmation of everything I believe and of our faith. I love the Book of Mormon.
Favorite hymn?
Come let us anew. And I suppose the predicate for that is great-great-grandfather Levitt died at Mount Pisgah on the way across the plains, and the story is told that as he was fading, he asked the daughter-in-law to sing "Come Let Us Anew," and I guess somewhere in the second verse of that he passed away, but the lyrics and the music just always been special to me.
Brother Higbee, thank you so much.
Well, I'm counting on you guys. Make me look good.